I am Jim Stout from ADSR Sounds.
And I'm Mike Acosta.
And welcome to a very special edition of a Halloween Gear Chat. I know, right? Can't believe it's Halloween already. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about some of our favorite movies and some of the coolest sounds in those movies and the general just kind of concepts of what makes a spooky sound. So, Mike, let's start off with you. What's one of the movies that really kind of caught your attention from the sound that just added that third dimension for you?
Well, it depends if we're talking, so we're talking when I first,
Yeah.
Man, that is a really difficult one. There's a couple, but I would probably have to say sound-wise, when I would hear things from it, that just gave me the real, creep factor. I'd probably have to say it was Halloween and Poltergeist. It's hard to choose between, the two.
One's more slasher, one's more paranormal.
But it's it's just one of those things where those sounds are so iconic, that every time that movie comes on, it just instantly brings back, memories of when I was a kid and I first saw those movies and how they creeped the hell out of me, and a lot of it wasn't even so much what was going on the screen at the time, but more so the music and things and effects that were happening in the background that just made you extremely anxious and not knowing, and it really built that tension and get your heart pumping. And when you think about it, it's all the sounds and tones and things that were being used, and then something wouldn't even happen, but it's the way that the music and sound design led up to that point, that got you anxious and all freaked out and stuff. So I would have to say those two for me. What about you?
I would, again, Poltergeist is definitely one of those up there where it really made it feel otherworldly because of the sounds, and in my opinion, it made me feel like that was really happening. The sound gave the scene legitimacy, and I think the other one for me was. And I saw this, I think it was around middle school or so, was The Evil Dead.
Ah, yes.
The Evil Dead, I thought was, that drone that they have from the POV shot, where it's just kind of chasing stuff, and the tension that it built up when it was,
it was just creepy.
It was really, really crazy. But apparently,
that is true.
Yeah, apparently that drone sound, that it's called the Force, and that was the name that they gave it during movie production, from what I understand. And it was just a series of drones and pitch down vocals and tape manipulation stuff. But we do actually have something very cool regarding Poltergeist.
We do. That whole scene. And I think it was very iconic when, Carol Ann first gets, sucked in, to the TV, and they're all looking for her, and the brother's calling for the parents, and he's freaking out, Carol Ann, and the parents come up and where is she? And they hear the voice, and they're like, oh, okay, she's okay. Yeah. And they're looking around the room, and they're realizing that she's not there. And then you hear the voice, and it's just like this weird, outer space kind of thing, and then they realize that, they're hearing the voice, and then it's kind of coming from the TV. Yeah. And at that time, again, there weren't a whole lot of, paranormal type movies that were really groundbreaking and really making a lot of noise. But the only
one I can really think of would be like the Exorcist. Which was another great. Yes. That had some really, really.
But there was a big gap between when The Exorcist came out and when Poltergeist came out. Yeah. So again, I think the generations of people who watched, like my parents told me about the night that they went to go see The Exorcist when it came out.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby is another one.
And my parents literally told me that it scared the hell out of them so bad that people left the theater. They could not stay through the entire, screening of the movie, that people were leaving. And that after my parents got out, that they were literally terrified, when they got back to the house and everything. They were seriously, it messed with them for a bit, man,
It did, it definitely did, but you know, not to go back to Poltergeist, and the reason why that's an important thing is we've got an exclusive interview with Mr. Alan Howarth, and he spills the beans on how he created the Poltergeist effect. So
so we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah,
you guys are going to have to watch that video. And you'll get the lowdown on what he used. And we were really surprised because we had all these things in our head of what we thought was used on that movie and a few others, and we were absolutely like dead wrong.
What do you call it? Yeah, wrong.
Wrong. Like you know, I was like, wow, okay.
No,
crushed all my dreams.
Yeah, that's only happened to me a couple of times actually, where I was just like so wrong. One of them was Roger Lynn, and I was at the NAMM show one year. This is a side story. I was at the NAMM show one year, and and I was talking to Roger Lynn, and we were talking about, you know, the legacy of drum machines, and I said the word LM2, and Roger looked at me and he goes, "What the fuck's an LM2?" And I was like, "Well, isn't that the one that came after the LM1, the bigger one? It's not so." And he's like, "There's no such thing as an LM2." Just bitch slapped me right there on the freaking NAMM floor. It was just like, I never knew. There's the Linn drum, and then there's the LM1. The Linn drum is what erroneously has been called the LM2, what I've been doing it. So, you know, so, and then I was just having flashbacks to that sheer terror when Roger Lynn is like destroying and then
it's time for me to go home now.
Oh yeah, I was just like, oh my God, you know, you're standing next to a legend and you're like, and you fuck it up, but whatever, well, shit happens. The same kind of thing, you know, with Alan Howarth. We kind of had these preconceptions, and there's been a lot of, you know, internet rumors about some of the gear that he'd used. Yeah. So for the longest time, one of the big rumors that we had heard about was the fact that Alan was using, you know, sq-80s and the Ensoniq stuff.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It turns out he wasn't. You know, so not to say that this synth hasn't been on a bunch of other really cool sounds, but it turns out that that's not the case. And to find out what he used, you got to watch these videos.
The video.
Fascinating stuff. So, you know, getting back to, you know, creating some of these sounds and creating some of these, you know, the sonic soundscapes that really I think move the horror genre forward, you know, so much quicker than some of the other movies, I feel like, you know, because the horror movies it's so much about the tone, it's so much about the scene, it's so much about, you know, creating an emotion, and music does a great job of that. But when you start getting into the sound effects things, that's when it starts becoming real in your own mind, in my opinion anyway. I think a lot of people have, you know, different philosophies on how, you know, sound affects them in certain ways, and you know,
and sometimes I feel like my whole outlook on it is it's very like psychological kind of you know, trickery somewhat, because you know what we perceive as a, you know, simple sound. So let's, for example, you know, a child's toy. This could be like one of those little Jack-in-the-Box things, and it sounds pretty and, you know, sparkly, and it's just a kid's toy. Oh, that's so cute. Now, you take that same sound and you put that in over a picture that has a dark background, there's blood everywhere, you know, and there's some child's voice, you know, with a massive echo on it, and then you have that same sound playing, and now it's creepy as hell. And now you've got like this phobia against, you know, musical boxes and clowns.
I was going to say, I think that's what happened with clowns. I think everybody was just like, you know.
And that's all, again, Poltergeist too. I don't know how many times I heard, you know, I don't know how many times I've heard where people said, I used to like clowns, and then after I watched Poltergeist, I couldn't stand clowns anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people might have had, you know, somebody had to have a phobia of clowns to come up with that scene, I think, you know, because, you know, never really something I thought about. Yeah, but that definitely put me off clowns as well. I didn't want to have any part of it, but like, you know, things like the music box, you say, I mean, those innocent kind of sounds just makes it so much more gut-wrenching, because it's associated with happy memories and stuff, and to turn those memories and go to the polar opposite of that.
Yeah.
You know, that's where you start getting those things that like,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
now, Jack-in-the-Boxes creep the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, and it's like, it's so simple, and sometimes with something like that, you know, you have, you know, this musical box playing, but now you put this reverb on it, and then you start, you know, detuning the reverb where it's like, and it's like, okay, now it's not a pretty box anymore, and it just creeps the hell out of you. Yeah. But it's so simple. Again, it's all about, the psychology behind it, like what you're putting in your mind, what is going through your head. Yeah. Because the sound itself isn't really scary. It's what you're thinking in your head,
And the way it's just twisted or slowed down, and the pitching, or the kind of the instability of things,
and
give it that
some
kind
of
of
the
uncertain thing.
And when I think about it, sometimes some of the most simplest sounds have been some of the scariest ones ever.
Yeah. Yes. That is true. Or when you, and I've always said this about kind of sound effects and stuff. I mean, a lot of them, you always kind of would listen to me and wonder, how the hell did they do that? But I always think of them like a magic trick. When you see a magic trick for the first time, you're like, "How? That's amazing! That's incredible!" But then when you find out how the magic trick is done, there's nothing to it. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, it's a mirror, it's a this, it's a whatever. I had it in my pocket. I had another one in my pocket the whole time. I just throw the other one away. Just little things like that, and you're like, really? That's all it was? And somebody's like, oh, somebody screamed into a tin can, and it was like, yeah, that created the horror drone of whatever. I think. Yeah, that stuff is always, fascinating, but it takes some time to, kind of develop these sounds and experiment a lot of stuff. So I'm sure there's been so many sound effects that, just hit the cutting room floor that didn't make the cut for whatever reason, and in certain contexts of other films, they'd do perfect. So I think there's that discovery aspect is still fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, happy mistakes.
Yeah, and I think, when we start looking at some of these things, I mean, very, very simple basic synthesizer sounds can create a lot of kind of tension. So one of them is wind. And wind is just basically pitch noise. You take white noise, you add some resonance to it, detune the filter, and you basically start pitching the noise, which is wind. So we've got an Emulator II lined up in this as well. So here's just wind by itself. And then if you add more reverb and stuff to it, and you start filling things out a bit and kind of creating that, the space of it, and all it is just, pitch noise. And then if we add in, some other sounds, and the emulator, these are all the original sounds from the factory library of the emulator, and then also what was called the OMI series. So I had the original Emulator II OMI series, and I was able to convert that over to an emulator that's stable.
So besides us being like Siskel and Ebert, and we're discussing, some of these movies and everything, gear chat wise, obviously with a lot of the, the movies that were made and everything, it's almost impossible to track down and figure out what gear was used in every single movie. So, the sq-80 we know was used on a lot of stuff. It can replicate, or it has the sounds that were used in a lot of, different movies and everything. Even though another piece of equipment may have been used, this still has a lot of those sounds in it. And then we have the emulator in the back there, which actually has all these horror sounds and that are in there. And obviously, when Jim starts playing and going through some of those in a little bit and showing you them, you'll be able to hear and recognize instantly a lot of like classic slasher films and things like that used a lot of those samples from the emulator. And again, it's a simple thing, like one simple sound that was pitched down and then has like this massive reverb on it, and all of a sudden it takes on a whole new form.
Yeah. Classic build sounds and Alpha B5 echoes. Let's see. It's supposed to be surf, so it's supposed to be waves. Not too far off, actually, Mystery. Drown that in reverb and delay and stuff, and pitch it and slow down.
Pitching everything.
P-Ville. And again, these are just preset sounds that were in the sq-80. You know what that reminds me of? Phantasm.
Boy. Man, that movie still creeps me out, man. The old man.
Yeah. Again, it's just one note. things like that.
Almost similar too to when the kid first gets a glimpse into the other world of where this old man comes from, and you hear all those sounds. It's very similar to that.
Yeah. This is one that's just glass. I think there's one. I think it's yeah.
So this is all the
This is all Emulator right here.
So these are all sounds from the Emulator.
So that's a very, very famous sound right there. That it kind of builds up. We were actually just listening to it. It's in Sleepaway Camp. It's in there. Door creaks. Glass breaking. Stinger right there. It's just like a reveal. You know.
That was used a whole bunch there.
And these were all from the original Emulator library. And then for reverb, we're actually using the IIIXS MIDI Verb 2. We've got it set to preset 49, one of the Bloom effects. And that's just a great reverb for a lot of these kind of things. Alan spills beans on what he used on some of the other stuff and the reverbs that he used. And, and that's pretty fascinating. But these were one of the early first 16-bit reverbs that came out. And it's the only one that I know of in the MIDI world that's got those Bloom effects in there where you hit it and it's really dense sounding. So when you hear it, it goes like that, you know, and classic things like Friday the 13th. You know, that one sound is iconic, and I think, you know, anytime people kind of emulate that sound, it's supposed to immediately have that, you know, creepy vibe. You know, those are signature sound effects that. Oh yeah, and I think,
and you know, too, again, talking about Phantasm, you know, even the music, the dun, 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 you know, it's like even that it's very simple.
Yeah.
But the sharp, high-pitched sound of it, you know, very metallic, you know, and even that just has that creep factor. So again, some of the most, how we were saying, some of the most simplest things, you know, like, of course, the Halloween piano thing, Yes. You know, these are just real simple little things, but
so we'll load up.
Super creepy.
There's a piano collab bank in here. I want to see if there's like a toy piano in here, or something kind of like that. Box piano. Oops, I'm still on the emulator. So let's hops chords. Let's see. All right, here, toy piano. So, you know, getting back to that, and let's add in some of the reverb and create that kind of tone. When we keep it minor. Yeah, start pitching out like.
It's just real simple stuff.
Start really getting creepy out of that. And that's supposed to be like a very, you know, kind of sweet sound. And open it up. Yeah, it's just great creepy stuff. Things like Puppet Master, you know, stuff like that, where they're supposed to be like sweet doll toys, you know, and kind of marionettes, and they just all of a sudden put some teeth on them and put some scary music and then move them from the camera, and you're like, what the hell is that? I don't have anything to do with that.
Yeah, that was definitely unique. I thought it lost its, you know, luster after they did like 7 of them or something.
Well,
like that, you know, but
yeah, I mean, at that point they're just being made for, you know, Netflix. You know, it's like it's filler. So I think you know, it's fine. But I look at, you know, when you look at some of the earlier genre movies that kind of, you know, help define it. So we're talking about the Halloweens and the Friday 13th and these kind of things. I think you know, the sound on those really did lay the groundwork for, you know, all of horror movies that are even coming out today.
You know, one thing just came to mind right now too. Remember the movie Silver Bullet?
Oh, great! Another Stephen King one. Yeah, yeah.
So, but remember how they took the howling of the wolf and they actually played it and pitched it down, and you could tell they sound because because they were making it as part of the music.
Yeah.
And that was just really like
I love
weird.
It, I love it when the sound effects and the music are really kind of intertwined. Because a lot of times in the movie world, it's like the composer and the sound designer never even see each other.
Oh yeah. American Werewolf in London. All the sounds used when his bones are cracking and he's like, turning into the werewolf the first time.
A lot of those sounds are things like like celery. A lot of even twigs and stuff like that. But a lot of things that you think are more brittle, they're not. It's something really simple. Celery or paper ripping. Another great one is tape, like packing tape. You rip that off, and you can make some like amazing like skin rip sounds and stuff like that. And that gets a lot into the sample manipulation of things, and you can hear horror movies change as the technology started becoming more relevant. And I think today, with some of the movies, and we were talking about this earlier, like movies like Insidious and of course the Rob Zombie movies, all these newer generation of horror films that have real high impact kind of stuff. You can hear the techniques, but they're just adapting them to all the the new gear and come up with even new crazier things. So it's fascinating to go back and listen to it. So you think of what sense did they have and what could they do it with. You were going to hear a lot of emulator. And
I mean, you can hear it too. Again, this is kind of going back to the Alan Howarth and, like with the Halloween. So like the first Halloween came out, and you can hear in the movie, and when they cut scenes like, the piano riff thing changes pitch, because the tape was having to be manipulated to cut to scenes. And so sometimes it was slower, sometimes it was faster. Yeah. And then as it's playing, you can hear the sequences, they're out of time a little bit,
Yeah. Well, I mean, he explains a lot about that,
and then as he goes into the next series of movies, as time has progressed, now the technology has gotten better. Yeah. All of that stuff is a lot tighter, and the sync is there and everything, and you can hear it, know. So it's pretty cool. And he does talk about all that and what he was using and how that was just some crazy stuff, man, trying to score a movie that way.
Yeah. I mean, some of the things that he went through, and a lot of the synthesizers that were going on, and there was also a little bit of I guess in the 80s, because MIDI has started coming about and more synthesizers and more things were available, and you can definitely hear everything change as it goes about. But I think a lot of the main synthesizers, I think they started moving away from real kind of analog-y kind of sounds and real kind of like, Star Trek-y, whooshy sounds, and really started developing that organic aspect of things. And, the samplers, like the emulators, anything that had, a decent amount of sample time in it, that's what they could take and draw out. And here's another one, Hell's Bell. Druid drone.
And the low end and the punch on that emulator is still, it still kicks ass.
Yeah, it's got to be my favorite digital sampler of all of them. This one, the one before it, so this is the Emulator IIIXS, and it was their first all digital emulator. The original Emulator III had analog filters, so the Emulator 1, 2, and 3 all had analog filters in them, and but the problem with that is it sounded great, but it was very expensive to make. And having a sampler with more than 16 notes of polyphony, you had to have a filter for each one of those voices. Yeah. And the filter boards and the Emulator IIIs became, the racks were a little bit more reliable than the keyboards. The keyboards were always, there was just like these massive filter boards that they had in there. And granted, they do sound amazing when you find a properly calibrated one, they sound great. But there's something about the Emulator IIIXS that it's just got this really super cool hi-fi sound to it, and even the older samples that I load into it, they sound amazing. So it sounds different than the IIIXS. I would say it has more of a rounder kind of tone to it. The IIIXS are very, I mean, they're great sounding samplers, and they're really clean and sterile. And this one's just as clean, but there's something else to it. I don't really know what it is. And
I remember, I don't know when they started, but I remember on some particular samplers, on the output stage of the Akai samplers, they would always put, a frequency bump. So it had like there was a special EQ curve that was on the output.
Yeah.
That you had no control over. It was just, that was part of their sound.
Yeah, Roland did that too with the emphasis on it. Remember, you could turn the emphasis up and down. It kind of like would be like an exciter kind of vibe to it. Yeah. But these things were freaking expensive when they came out. Like I think the way this one sits, I mean, it's a 32 megabyte version with the analog inputs. There was two versions. It had XP that just has digital inputs on it, and then the XP is getting analog inputs on it. But they were like, I think $7,000 for the full blown.
I remember when I wanted an E6400, man. And I couldn't afford it. I was like, no way. Like, I wanted one, and the way that the person that turned me on to the E6400 was Q of Uberzone. Yep.
No, it's funny. I knew Q back then as well, and we'd gotten our E4Xs at the same time, and he got a turbo version, and I couldn't swing with the turbo version at the time. But I mean, the regular version was 64 notes of polyphony, and I think something like 64 mega RAM, and the turbo version had 128 voices and 120 megabytes of RAM. So I mean, it was fine, but these still sound different than those did.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but those samplers, I mean, you don't really see them anymore. I used to see them all the time on eBay, but
on the 6400, I don't remember if it was that model or whatever, but I remember it was a big thing about the Z-plane filters.
Yeah. They did some cool stuff. I really like the AI filters, but whatever. I digress. When we get back to the famous sounds, but one thing is, I mean, there's a lot of the famous sounds were in here. Scary Choir. Footsteps. Beer bells. So it's most of it's that same sound, just a different version of it. Two gongs. You know what it also reminds me of? It's also kind of a bit of a Tron aspect, like light cycle kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was way before this thing was, but synth bells. Ether space.
Like, that would totally be the Phantasm sound.
Oh yeah. That's a very sci-fi-ish kind of.
Yeah.
It's very almost happy. There's and then the Jason. There's actually a band called Jason in here. Let it load up. So everything loads off of Sonic's SD cards. So it's got a mod in it. Let's see if we're... Alright, so it's basically that same thing. Banshee Scream. That was supposedly one of the big things about it could transpose up and down 5 octaves with 0 pitch distortion. I mean, that was the marketing claim.
Whatever the claim was, I mean, it sounds good, and it definitely, you know, had its own unique sound.
FM digital effects. Yeah. I mean, one of the only real kind of limitation of these things is you can only have you can store 100 banks on a drive, and most of the time back then you would run out of drive space before you ran out of banks. So it was, you know, but now it's like this will only format up to like 500 meg per card. So it's kind of a oh yeah, remember that. I mean, I hear that kind of stuff on anything from 84 and beyond.
Yeah.
I hear it on.
And you definitely started to hear, you know, once you got into the mid 80s, the uses of, you know, effects modules and things like that. What was once originally designed for either like vocals or like, you know, studio musical use was now being used in different ways to really affect sound. And I'm referring more so to like the Eventide products, you know, like the H3000 and things like that. You know, when I first, you know, got to use an H3000 it was way later. Obviously, it was like I'd say 94, 95 when I started working in radio.
Yeah.
And I actually got to, you know, sit in the studio where they had a couple of H3000s, and I was, you know, producing some commercials and things like that. And I'd never seen an H3000 before. Yeah. And, you know, all I had was my crappy, you know, little, what did I have? Like a DOD, you know, like for reverb or something like that. And that was pretty much it. You know, and as I had that there and I was processing vocals, you know, we're running commercials and I was running through it. And the one thing that we used to do that I liked is, you know, it had that super like fluidy jog wheel that you could literally just spin it and it would just go, but it would also flow through the effects and there would be no delay or any glitching as it loaded the next effect. Yeah. So one thing that we would do to save time on commercials was just we would run the voiceover and then we would just cycle through multiple effects and you would get this wah, 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 and cool, commercial's done. You know, but as I was going through that, I started to, you know, dig in and I was like messing with things and messing with pitch and all this stuff, and then I started getting all these weird, crazy kind of, you know, effects, which I know now are like very drone and, you know, kind of generator kind of things that were just like out there. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I would love to have one. Obviously, I could never afford that, you know, at that time. But I was definitely seeing how that could be used for a whole bunch of other things, you know, more so than what it was probably originally designed for, you know. Yeah,
I mean, I always wonder, like, when some of these designers, some of these teams, you know, build some of these products, you know, they build it to, I think, you know, try and replicate or fix a certain tool. But the fact that, you know, these parameters can go so crazy out of the range and generate stuff that was, you know, never heard before, then that's always fascinated me. And I think, you know, the DP4 that didn't really come about until 92, I believe. But that box can generate some amazing things. It's got generators in it, and you can feed back processors to other things.
It's like the poor man's H3000.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. But I think it had 4 processors in there, so I think there was a little bit more things you could do. I think the H3000 was definitely a more high-end piece. But for what that thing can do, it sounded amazing. And we're going to do a whole other gear chat on the DP4.
Yeah.
And because there's some really, really cool history with that box. But, well, you know, getting back to some of the original gear that was used, obviously things like the DX7 and stuff like that. And there's actually a bank in here called FM effects. So this is loading 32 megabytes at a time. A whole 32 megabytes. Yeah, it's still loading. But I mean, dude, 32 meg was huge.
Back then, yeah.
Huge.
32 megs was probably the equivalent now, like if you had 4 terabytes. Sound familiar? That's probably more of a early 1991, 92 techno era.
THX 1138. Like a sci-fi kind of sounds. Again, that's a whole nother episode. Metal Merge. Just kind of weird shapes. Let's see what shapes. More of the same. Heavy bang.
Somebody out there, if you haven't seen the ADSR Halloween pack that we did, which is called Voices from Beyond, there's actually some bonus material in there, like some drones and things like that you know, the emulator was used on, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I used the emulator and a couple of other using some of the newer technology, some convolution stuff and things like that really kind of copped the tone of a lot of famous drones and area kind of spaces. So I'm sure we've heard that somewhere. It sounds.
All the sounds. It
reminds me of something like in like an HBO Twilight Zone or something, you know?
Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, something like that.
Possible.
It happens, but I think one of the other sense that, you know, some of the larger budget movies were using were like, you know, of course the Synclaves and the Fairlights and these kind of things. I mean, these were big budget, you know, movie things, but I find so much satisfaction and the guys that really don't have a lot of stuff, like these smaller independent movies. And it gets back to The Evil Dead. I mean, it took them a long time to make that movie just because they had no money to make it. So it was made over a couple of different sets. It was made with, there are actually even different actors in some scenes, you know, where it's like someone with Sam Raimi's hands doing whatever and these kind of things. So it's always fascinating to hear that. But these guys didn't have a lot, you know, big budget for it. And the force sound that they created really was. And I loved how they, you know, manipulate the pitch and stuff and the intensity as it starts getting closer to like the windows and these kind of things. And I love the dynamics that they do. It's like, you know, you've got the shot of you know, the person running and and all you can hear is their breath and, you know, the leaves crunching. And then you switch to whatever, you know, demonic force is chasing them. And it's just this roar. And you're like, roar, you know, like, oh.
And it's just going, it's just cut so dry, like, you know, that it adds to that creep factor, you know.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, again, when we're looking at, you know, more of these indie films, I've always found that they've always had something more unique to them than some of the big budget, you know, kind of movies and stuff. And, you know, one case in point, you know, for me, I'm a big fan of the Rob Zombie flicks, you know, so like House of a Thousand Corpses, you know, that originally was shot in 2000, but wasn't released until 2003. And had an estimated budget, I think it was between 5 and 7 mil, somewhere in there is all they had to work with. And again, for the time being, everything's much more expensive now, and, you know, the cameras and all that kind of stuff. You know, but for the quality of, you know, that movie and the sound design on it was just, man, it was just so good. And in the theaters, the way those sounds hit and they come through is just badass. And he's been an engineer and mixed for like Metallica, The Cult, you know, all these really big, you know, some really hardcore bands. Of course, Rob Zombie's band, White Zombie. And then he's done stuff for BT, you know, the Crystal Method, Ensoniq. I mean, this guy's worked a very wide spectrum.
He's in the business.
He's in the business, you know. And I think House of a Thousand Corpses was his first, you know, film score type of deal. But when you listen to all the sounds, you can definitely hear this guy's background, you know, with hard metal rock and that kind of stuff, because the effects themselves have a very guitar stomp box, you know, kind of vibe to them, which gives them this really creepy, like grunge, you know, type of sound. And then the way that they just cut in and sharp and just you know, and so it's very lo-fi.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too. I mean, looking at the technology that was really coming, you know, really kind of coming of age in the early 2000s. And that's really when the migration of kind of doing everything in the box really started happening. I remember going into Hans Zimmer's place, and this was just when he switched over to Giga Sampler, and it was still owned by Tascam, I think.
Ooh,
So I remember walking in Media Ventures, and they had just stacks and stacks of Emulator 4s. And my friend Ryland, you know Ryland Allison, there was they used to use a lot of 760s, and they had a SCSI patch bay that they built, and they would hot swap SCSI drives, and it worked. It's not supposed to, but somehow between 760s they were hot swapping SCSI drives. There's a picture of it somewhere. I'll find it. But yeah, a lot of those guys, Ryland did a lot of really amazing stuff, and you know, so looking at how some of these effects started changing, the stutter edit stuff that, you know, really started to come into play, the jump scare edits, the fast kind of like da da da, and it wasn't so much the stinger aspect of it, but it was definitely like you know, multiple kind of things. And Rob Zombie does a great job of that with, you know, just that sensory overload and combining that kind of editing together. And again, it's with nonlinear editing systems too.
And what I like is that when you hear it, you could totally tell this is like their passion for music is really represented in the sound design. We have some really cool gear chat videos planned. Again, some stuff is a little difficult to do because, you know, we don't have the gear, and we have to try and track down some of this stuff, you know, but
we've got the next one planned.
Yeah, the next one is planned. We've got some really cool things underway. So again, we'd love to get some feedback and comments from you guys. And who knows, you know, I think we've been also discussing possibly maybe even doing a live version of this. So that way you guys can kind of get, you know, involved and interactive, and we can answer some questions live and maybe do something like that.
Yeah, we can have a list of the gear that we have available, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, you know. It's like, okay, we've got this, and figure it out. And then also, yeah, we've got a lot of cool stuff planned.
Yeah, so if you, we do have Voices from Beyond for this month for Halloween. It has some really cool stuff. We spent a lot of time with some great voice actors, did a lot of really cool sound design effects and things like that, and manipulating all kinds of, so there's really cool stuff in there, really cool drones and things like that, again, using the emulator and whatnot. And again, we do have the Alan Howarth video, which I believe is in 4 parts.
4-part series, yeah.
4-part series. So if you really want to get the lowdown on all these classic, like, you know, scary films and sound design, if you have an interest into that, it's definitely worth watching. It's really interesting stuff, and a lot of things that Alan shares with us was completely mind-blowing. Yeah. And that's all I have to say. You really got to watch it.
We could have...
As always, don't forget to subscribe to the ADSR channel so that you can stay up to date with all the latest first look videos, overviews, tutorials, and of course, gear chat videos.